If this was a meeting of conventional farmers, everybody would just be complaining about prices and everybody would be miserable. But in this group, everybody's excited, and organic people are so much fun to be with. No matter where you go in the world, it's the same. Going to shift gears a little bit. I mean, in the beginning we talked about why we want to do this. Then we talked about the science behind it. And as we encourage farmers to transition to organic, we have to develop new tools that help us move in that direction. And certainly, it's not hard to understand that tillage can be detrimental to organic life in the soil. And there's many conventional farmers that are using no-till technology will tell us organic farmers that they're actually doing something more healthy for the soil than we are because they don't use tillage. They don't realize how damaging herbicides are to the system. But as I began to play with these systems several years ago, I was talking with a lot of conventional farmers who farm some fairly large farms, and they said, we've been slowly getting away from tillage, and we've seen improvements in our soil, less erosion, and we don't want to go back to doing all the tillage that organic farmers do, because many organic farmers till the soil every year. Sometimes, if we're in a vegetable operation, we may till the soil 2 or 3 or 4 times a year. And then with each main tillage, we have successive tillages, because if you plow, then you have to disc and you have to pack and you have to do all these other operations to get your seed in the ground, and each one of those can have a detrimental effect on the soil and the health of the soil. So there's a reason that we till the soil. As farmers, we till the soil to produce a clean surface, a nice seed bed, get rid of all the weeds, so it's a weed management tool, and get our seed in the ground. Conventional farmers have moved to herbicides to reduce tillage and manage weeds. So they're trying to get to the same place, one with tillage, one with herbicides. And as I was looking at our systems on our farm and thinking about how to reduce tillage, what I started doing was I moved from a moldboard plow to a chisel plow, or I would do a light disking, and I was trying to reduce the number of trips over the field I was making, and I was getting more weeds. The weed pressure began to be rather challenging. And it's because as conventional farmers reduce tillage, they increase herbicide use. You don't get something for nothing. I was trying to reduce tillage and not do anything else, and I was failing. It wasn't until I decided that what I really needed to do was rethink and remanage my cover crop management and increase my cover crops that things began to work out much better. And so as I reduced tillage, I increased my cover crop management. So it's harder than, organic farming is hard enough, and now we put this other level of management on top of it for cover crops. But look how cover crops can be really important for us in terms of nitrogen fixation. These cover crops were all planted before October, and here on May 2nd, I already had 167 pounds of nitrogen in that crimson clover, the red clover over there. But if I waited 2 more weeks, I could go all the way up to 223 pounds of nitrogen. If I was going to plow this, I would plow it even before here, earlier, because it was easier to plow and easier to incorporate in the soil. Because if I wait too long, I have too much biomass, and it's rather difficult to manage. Just to put this in here, because just to remind me to tell you that if you're going to plant cover crops and depend on them for this system to work, you have to put a lot of energy into getting your cover crop established. Usually when the system fails, it fails because farmers did not get their cover crop planted on time, because they will say to me, oh, it was just a cover crop, so I got it in a little bit late, sometimes 2 months late. Or they'll say, it was just a cover crop seed, and seed was expensive, so I only planted it at half the seeding rate. Know how much seed you're putting in the ground and put in enough to do the job, because we're going to ask our cover crops to do a lot. I think we can all agree that if you put mulch on top of the surface of the soil, you can stop annual weeds from growing. Do we all agree with that? Anybody disagree with that? Okay. So if we have a garden and we put straw on the garden, the weeds don't grow. If we have a little bigger patch, we can do that. But if you have 1,000 hectares, you can't do that. That's not going to work. But what if we grow the mulch right in the field where we're going to use it? This is California. This is Dr. Jeff Mitchell is doing some work with us at Rodale. We can grow biomass right in the field, and then using modern technology. Organic farming is not opposed to modern technology. We can use satellite guidance systems. We can use robots. We can use no-till planters. As long as it fits into that sieve that J.I. Rodale gave us many years ago, when we're thinking about healthy food and healthy people. Does spraying herbicide on the soil make people healthy? No. Nobody, even the people who make herbicide, wouldn't say we spray it to make people healthy. They might argue that it doesn't make people unhealthy, and they would argue that. But they don't do it to make people healthy. So we can't use that. But can we use modern technology? Yes, we can. It doesn't make people unhealthy to use a satellite system, so we can use that. And we're going to use modern no-till planters, and we're going to use different tools. Now, when I first started looking at managing cover crops, we didn't have a roller crimper like we're going to see tomorrow evening, right? We started with some off-the-shelf tools that we had, and we could knock the cover crop down, but it didn't kill it. It wanted to stand back up. Nature wants this rye to stand up, so to get that seed head up in the air. So it's going to try to stand back up unless you crimp the stem. We tried mowing it. You can kill it with a mower, but now you can't plant into it, because now the planter is a hay rake. It still says planter on the side, but it's a hay rake. I tried it. And then there were some other tools like this rolling stalk chopper that are designed to knock corn stalks or grass stubble down to the ground, but it was too aggressive. It did too much work, and it exposed some soil. And in an organic system, if I can see the soil can see the sun, and the weeds are going to grow. The other thing that we did was we looked at conventional farmers as they plant no-till, and what they will tell you to do is get the residue away from the seed zone. So move the residue away, get your seed in the ground, and that'll work. And it does. But when I move this residue away, you can see all the weed seeds coming. And they're coming right in the row where there's nothing I can do about it. So that didn't work for me. So it wasn't until we designed our own tool and said, anybody ever get one of those tools that says one tool does everything? What it should say is one tool does nothing. They're handy. You get up, you put it in your car, and it's better than no screwdriver, but not much. So we decided we had to make a tool specifically for managing cover crops. And this was the tool that we designed. We designed it to put on the front of the tractor so that we could put the planter on the back of the tractor. You don't have to do that. You can pull it behind a tractor and make 2 passes. But it's a little bit like cutting hay. You don't drive over the hay and then cut it, because it would squash down. Now, the first tool that touches our cover crop is this roller crimper. If we put it on the back of the tractor, the first tool that touches the cover crop is a rubber tire. Rubber tires may do a good job, they may not, depending on the condition of the soil. Sometimes they just squash the cover crop into a tire track, the roller goes across the top, and the cover crop stands back up. Then you have these stripes down the field, and it looks like you didn't know what you were doing. I'm not an ag engineer, but when I was thinking about making a roller, first idea was to put a blade from one end straight across to the other end. But if you think about it, it's going to be on the front of the tractor, and it's going to be touching the ground, then there's going to be a blade in the air and a blade on the ground, and it's going to bounce. And that bouncing you feel in the steering wheel. I don't want to do that, you don't want to do that. Maybe your hired hand can go do that, but you don't want to do it. So in my mind, I was trying to figure out how to do this, and then one day I was watching my wife make pasta, and she had a pasta roller. It's a rolling pin, has blades on it, but it's like in a spiral. It's like twisted. So it rolls perfectly smooth right across the cutting board. The ribbons of pasta come out, perfect. So in my mind, I said, well, if I grab the end of that cylinder and twist it, now the blade is part of the blade is touching the surface of the soil all the time, and it doesn't bounce. The problem with that is it's a screw. And if you're screwing the front of the tractor uphill, that's okay, but we farm on hills. If you're screwing it downhill, it's like plowing snow. It's hard to keep the tractor where you want it. It's just going to go downhill. So my neighbor and I decided that we would twist both ends to the middle, making it very difficult to build, but now it's neutral. It just rolls along. The other thing we did was, you can see that we mounted the blades. They're not 90 degrees to the cylinder. They're leaned back. My neighbor who helped me build this first prototype, they use steel wheels on their tractors because he's a Mennonite farmer. And he said if you make these cleats 90 degrees to the surface, when they leave the surface of the soil, they kick. And they pull and they tear, and they're going to rip the cover crop and expose bare ground. But if you set them on an angle, they lift off on an angle. There's no kicking or tearing, and it'll just lift off nice and gentle. So that's what we did. Now we have a system that allows us to manage weeds in organic farms without tillage. Over here, this field was alfalfa. So it's a perennial. You can't kill that with a roller. You won't kill it. So I moldboard plowed it, I disked it, I packed it, I planted it. Now the seed's in the ground. Then I had to cultivate it, so I rotary hoed it twice, cultivated it twice, and harvested it, so I had 9 trips over the field. That's pretty standard for an organic grain farm that you have to cultivate. I ended up with 143 bushels of corn. Over here, I had a field that was hairy vetch. That's a winter annual. I put the roller on the front of the tractor, the planter on the back of the tractor. The vetch supplies all the nitrogen I need, so there was no fertilizer. The vetch supplies all the weed management, so there was no cultivation. And I didn't have to till because I have a no-till planter, so I rolled it and planted it in one pass and harvested it in one pass. 2 trips instead of 9. And I got more corn. And you can see fewer weeds and nicer corn. People said, oh, that's not possible. Here's a picture of planting corn. So this field is ready to plant. Here this is already planted. Here's what the planter looks like going through the field. Look at all that biomass. I did a good job of getting my cover crop established. If I can do that, planting corn, all I do is go plant the corn and go home. I don't do anything to it. Come back and harvest it. I get more corn than my neighbors where they do all that work and put all the inputs in. It cannot get any easier than planting it and harvesting it. That's all we did. In this particular field, my neighbor harvested this because my combine broke down, and his yield monitor said he got 150 bushel of corn there. He said, on my field across the street over here on this road over here, you can see in the back, he said, I spread manure, I plowed it, I did all those other operations, I cultivated it 4 times, I got less corn than you did. And you didn't put any manure on it, and you didn't do all that other work. He said there's something going on here that we need to pay attention to. So, again, we can get, this is already planted. You can see what it looks like. You can't even tell where it was planted. You can't see it. So no weeds grow. The trick is timing is really important. And I know tomorrow night we're going to talk a lot more about cover crops, but the challenge is in matching the cover crop up to the cash crop you want to plant into it. The timing is different in Norway than it is in Pennsylvania. But we have farmers in Canada that are doing it. So we know it can be cold tolerant. We have farmers in Italy that are doing it, in Germany and Argentina and Russia. And so we have farmers all over the world using this system and playing around with it. So it's going to be your challenge to figure out if this is a tool you want to use to reduce tillage, how are we going to make it work here? But here you can see corn, for example, with the mulch still in place. If I can get corn this big with no weeds and no work, I can make money. I'm a happy camper. And I'm improving the health of the soil because there's never a point in time when there aren't green living roots on that soil. So the microbial life in the soil is happy. The earthworms are happy. People talk about cover crops and they say, oh, well, I just planted rye. Rye is not all the same. We have to figure out what's going to work really well on your farm, and what works here isn't going to work on your farm because you're up in the mountains and here you're not, and things are going to be different. So this was in North Carolina, which is south of Pennsylvania in the United States, and they tried many different rye varieties. This is the one I use. It does very well in cold weather, but it doesn't do well in South Carolina. This does much better. So we have to figure out what's going to work in your area. Rye is not all the same. Oats aren't all the same. Spelt is not all the same. You can roll and kill any annual or winter annual. Any of them. So we roll buckwheat, peas, field peas, Austrian winter peas, oats, triticale, spelt, wheat, forage soybeans, legumes like hairy vetch, crimson clover, nitro alfalfa, any of those annuals or winter annuals. Once they flower, they're easy to kill. Now, this is what we were talking about, because once you kill the cover crop, you have to have a planter that's going to get the seed in the ground. If the seed isn't in the ground, it's surely not going to grow. So these seeds that are laying here aren't going to germinate. I see a seed here and a seed here. The seed has to get in the ground, which means you have to cut through all of this residue. So you have to have your planter set up to be able to do that. Not all planters are created equal. Sometimes you may have to add other tools to the planter. A planter is just it's like a Christmas tree. It's a frame to hang ornaments on. And you're going to have to play around and figure out what's going to work on your farm and your soil. For example, we were talking with a equipment designer, Peckway Planter Company, and explaining to them the problem about cutting through that mulch. If this piece of paper was a piece of mulch, and it's not, my coulter isn't sharp, all I do is stuff it in the ground. On the surface, it looks like it's cut. It looks like it's cut, but it's not. It's just stuffed in the ground, and if you pull it, it's all in one piece. That seed won't germinate and grow. You have to cut it. It's rather hard to cut some of this material. If I just hold it in my hand, if you have a pocket knife, I don't care how sharp it is, you can't cut it. But if I hold it with two hands, now you can slice right through it, even with something very dull. So we created a set of wheels and a disc that pin the cover crop to the ground, and then this disc slices right through it. It's called a residue slicer. I put them on my planter. Works great. So you may have to change your planter. This is the way my planter looks now. This is the planter here. But I do all this other stuff up front to get through that mulch. So I have a set of residue slicers right here to slice through that residue. I've got some residue managers here. If I need to chop it up, I can put those on or off. And a lot of times I take them off. Sometimes I leave them on. I play with it. I've got another coulter inside of this, double disc openers here, so I'm slicing it 3 times. Rapidly. It just goes through the field quickly. And then I plant the seed. And then the back of the planter, I took off the plastic wheels and put cast iron wheels on there. So it's heavy, so it can close that seed trench up. Now I can plant in anything. I can drive through crops and plant with this that you couldn't walk through. You would need a machete to get through it. It would be so tall and dense you couldn't get through it. I can drive the planter right through it. And here we are at the end of the year. This is Dr. Gladys Zanotti, one of our research scientists. You can see if you have fields this clean, with no herbicide, no tillage, no cultivation, that's a lot less work. Well, if it works with corn, it would work with soybeans. Why not? It's the biology of the system that's working. It's not magic. It's not the crop. It's not the tool. If we do the cover crops right, the cash crops grow themselves. But there's a lot of things we don't understand about the system yet. Here you can see that farmers will tell us, if I have that much crop, I would like to cut it and bale it and either use it for bedding or sell it because I have value there. And so you can see here we cut it and baled it. and over here we planted into it. Here's what it looked like when we cut it and baled it. Nice and clean. We put our soybeans in there, organic no-till. What a weedy mess. Didn't work very well. We didn't suspect it would, but again, documenting what farmers were telling us they wanted. Here we have a system, this is what we don't understand. June 1st, a little late. We came in, we rolled that down, that was ready to plant, we rolled it, we planted into it, nice mulch, nice soybeans, we increased our yield, but we still have some weeds. When we planted that same treatment 1 week earlier, June 3rd, we had almost twice as much yield. What happened? We don't know. Waiting a week cost us 20 bushels of soybeans. These soybeans are worth about $24 to $30 a bushel. So we lost $600 an acre, $1,200 per hectare by waiting 1 week. We don't understand that biology yet. There's a lot to learn in these systems. But you can see how nice and clean this is. And these are fields that have been organic for 40 years. So we know there's weed pressure there. You can see the weed pressure. It was tremendous. Because this was a replicated scientific project across 2 hectares. And this experiment was replicated in 3 different states. So we know the science is good. So we knew the weed pressure was there. But here you can see the weeds did not express themselves because the mulch stopped them from being there. Again, very important to get your cover crops planted on time. This photograph was all taken on April 1st, but we had different seeding dates. This was seeded in late summer. That was seeded much later, but the pictures were all taken on the same day. Which one of these is going to produce enough biomass to suppress the weeds? So we have farmers who say, oh, I didn't get my cover crop in. It's not going to do the job. You can't expect it to do that. But there's tricks that we can use for planting our cover crops. For example, if we plant a cover crop with a grain drill, it's going to be in rows. When we come by here and roll that down, if I roll it in the same direction, you're actually going to see those rolls. If I can roll the opposite direction, then it sort of folds it over and you don't see that bare ground. But the other thing we can do is plant half of the crop with a grain drill and half of it with a broadcast seeder. Now there are no rows. It's all covered. Now, it doesn't cost any more money to do that. 1 trip over the field, same amount of seed, everything's the same. It's just that now we don't have those rows and the system works better. So we have to learn these little tricks of how to make it work better. But if it works for grain crops, it will work for tomatoes. These are transplanted tomatoes. Again, it's the biology of the system that's doing the work. It can work for pumpkins and squash and cucumbers. These were direct seeded pumpkins, but we can transplant pumpkins as well. But again, if you can get a pumpkin plant this big, and anybody that grows vine crops organically knows that they're very challenging in a field situation to cultivate, because as they start getting viney, you can't cultivate them, but the weeds keep growing. But here, there's no weeds. The other thing with pumpkins, I don't know if you grow many pumpkins in Norway, but in the United States, pumpkins for Halloween is a big crop. There's 2 things sell pumpkins: a handle and cleanliness. Nobody wants to buy your mud stuck to the bottom of the pumpkin. So everybody has to clean pumpkins. They hire migrant labor to wipe all the mud and dirt off of a pumpkin. And it's very expensive. But here, the pumpkins all sit on top of the cover crop, so farmers love this system because they saved all the labor of cleaning pumpkins. The pumpkins just sit on top of the mulch, and they don't get dirt on them. So it saves a lot of money there. They said that money alone pays for the whole system, just in what you would save in keeping it clean. This was just last summer. This was a field of soybeans. We have a gentleman that builds rollers for us. And this was across the street from his shop. His neighbor is transitioning his farm from conventional to organic. And he said, I want to do some no-till. And so he had this soybean field. It was the first time he ever did it. And he said, look how beautiful that soybean field is. That's another picture across the street from his shop, growing soybeans without herbicide. We have farmers who are using the roller to improve their pasture. This farmer had the roller to plant crops, but here, after he grazed it, he ran the roller along his driveway here. And you can see wherever he rolled it, all the brown grass went down, disappeared. Green grass grew up. He said, I could regraze this much faster because when the cattle tried to graze this, these stems poke them in the eye, and it hurts. So they don't like to eat that grass. But over here, he said the fresh grass grew right up through it. So we're using it as a pasture management tool. There's so many ways that we can start to use this technology without using tillage to improve pasture. Just wanted to show you a couple of pictures from some other farms, and I know the scale may be different or relevant or not relevant, I don't know. This is a farm in Wisconsin, and he's planting soybeans with his grain drill. So he's rolling down rye and planting soybeans. And this was an experiment. I think I have another picture. This was in Argentina, and here we were doing a grazing experiment. So some of the cover crop was grazed off, and they planted soybeans, and some of it was left in place. So there's a bunch of things going on there in Argentina. This was a farm in Argentina. This farm is 34,000 acres, so about 16,000 hectares of organic farm. And we wanted to try doing some rolling of cover crops, so he took a little field of 200 hectares. He said, let's just take a little something to practice. So everything's relative, you know. He thought that was a small piece. What was really interesting was when we were on this farm, the day before I got there, they got about 20 centimeters of rain. All the fields that we passed, everything was flooded underwater. You could take a small boat and float across the field. When we got to before we got to his farm, the person that was taking me, Pedro Landa, Pedro said, "Don't worry, I brought boots because I know you want to walk out in the field." We planted soybeans that day. We took a shovel and we dug in that field because Fernando Rivera, who owns that field there, no, that's not him. Fernando said, I want to see where the water went. We took a shovel and we dug down 2 feet, about, a little less than a meter, 2/3 of a meter, down, and it was moist the whole way down. He said, I got every drop of that rain. None of it ran off my farm and went into the stream. It's all right here, and I can use it later. So they planted soybeans. But when he started to plant soybeans, I said, you're going to have trouble because your planter isn't set up right. You're going to have trouble getting the beans in the ground. And they made a few passes, and he couldn't get the soybeans in the ground. They had to take it back to the shop, work on it, added some more weight, changed things around, and went back out to the field and got their beans in the ground. You really have to pay attention to the planting equipment. It's both. Because you're asking, there's Fernando Rivera. And like I said, that was 200 hectares that we did there. This was a friend of mine who was on a sabbatical in Italy, and she said she came around the corner on a field tour, and there were people using a roller and planting vegetables. So here they have two knives in the ground to make a trench, and then they came by and they just hand transplanted the vegetables. Here you can see them rolling. This is ready to plant, and they're planting vegetables behind that roller. We have rollers that it can be, this one is designed to be pulled by horses. This is a large roller that went to South Africa. Here we designed one to work on raised beds, vegetables with raised beds, because on a bed you have a shoulder on that bed and the cover crops on the side. This is just ag engineering. If we can agree that the biology works, then ag engineers they put on their thinking cap and they love this kind of problem. And so these two rollers on the side float and get on the shoulder of the bed, and this farmer was transplanting tomatoes into this system, heirloom tomatoes. This was a farmer in California, Tom Willey. He's a large organic vegetable grower. And he grew this cover crop, and he rolled it down, and then he transplanted eggplant into it. And he sent me these pictures, and I was very concerned. Because look how small this eggplant looks compared to where he has black plastic. Same thing over there a little later in the season. And I called him, and I said, what happened? Because he's in Central Valley of California. We talk about soil health. It was Fahrenheit 104 degrees. I don't know what that is in Celsius, but It's hot. It's very hot. So when it's very hot, you go out and lay on the ground and put a sheet of black plastic over yourself. And you see how long you're going to survive. The temperature under the plastic was probably 120 degrees, much hotter. So all the microbial life dies. So we talk about soil health, and then as organic farmers, we put black plastic there and boil the little critters. So he said this was 20 degrees cooler under this mulch. So it kept the soil cool, but his transplants looked bad. So he's trying to get rid of black plastic. I said, well, what happened? Well, he said, when I rolled it, I did not believe it would kill it. So I didn't plant right away. I waited. I said, how long did you wait? He said, 30 days. 30 days in the life of an eggplant is eternity. And I said, well, did you start new transplants or did you just save the old ones? Oh, he said, I saved them behind the house. He said, I'm surprised they grew at all. They looked so terrible. So that made me feel a little bit better. Now, Tom Willie is a very fussy person, and you can see some weeds here. And so he sent his crew in there to pull those weeds by hand. But he said it took less time to pull those weeds than it did to pick up all this plastic at the end of the season. And he said, when I pick up the plastic, I still have to dispose of it. That's an environmental problem. Where over here, he said, all I had was beautiful biomass to put back in the soil and improve the health of my soil. This is, some people have heard of tillage radish or daikon radish. This is Steve Groff. He grows radish seed to sell. And behind him with the big white hat is Dr. Ron Morris at Virginia Tech University. And he developed this transplanter so he can transplant right into these mulches. So once you have an idea of keeping the mulch on the surface of the ground, other smart people start looking at ways to utilize it. So I didn't develop the transplanter, somebody else did. I didn't develop our planter or the Peckway residue slicer, somebody else did. So people are saying, oh, I see, the problem is no longer tillage, it's how do I plant into this mulch? Now we get people asking the right questions. And that's what you'll have to do. Here we're transplanting, we had field peas and some oats, and we rolled them, and then we have a transplanter on the back, and you can see we're setting winter squash. So this field is already planted to winter squash. And now the mulch will die and the squash will grow. So you still have something green and living there all the time. There you can see a little bit better the squash plants. And here we're setting them with a transplanter. That's at the Rodale Institute. People work on different scales. This isn't about scale. This is about biology doing the work. So here's a walk-behind tractor, a BCS walk-behind tractor, and put a roller on the front of that. Why not? It can work. Here, somebody is much bigger. This is 30 feet, doing bigger. Warren Buffett is one of the richest men in the world, and his son, Howard Buffett, is a farmer. And Howard Buffett has two rollers that are 60 feet wide. Howard Buffett is not organic. He's a conventional farmer. But he said, if I can roll cover crops and reduce my herbicide and improve soil health, I make more money while I improve the health of my soil. Why wouldn't I do that? So he's looking at organic as being a leader in directing how conventional ag is starting to move as we redefine what healthy soil means. Here, this person sent me a picture. She said, well, your roller is really a flat plate that you rolled into a cylinder. So she said, I unrolled it in my mind, and I looked around the farm for the smallest flat plate I could find, a piece of wood, a piece of 2x4, about half a meter. And on the bottom of it, she said, I screwed a piece of angle iron, put 2 pieces of wash line rope in it, put my foot on it, and I'm a crimper. You might notice it's inside a greenhouse. She said, I did the floor of the greenhouse, planted tomatoes in there, no soil-borne diseases splashing up off the ground, no weeding, the nicest tomatoes I ever grew with less work. It wasn't that less work was being done, it's just that the biology of the system was doing the work, not the person. Oh, there's Howard Buffett's roller, 60 feet wide. 2 of them. You can roll a lot of cover crops with that. Sometimes it doesn't work perfect. But we have cultivating equipment that can go through high residues, like this mulch, lift it up and set it back down, so we can go through and rescue a crop if we have to. If we don't have to, we don't do it. So we have to really be proactive and start talking about breeding and what it is we want our cover crops to do if we want these systems to work. If we don't want the system to work, then it was an interesting conversation and you set it aside and we go on with something else. We have to think about the planters and planter configurations, because when I first started working on the planter, I have a Monosem planter, a French planter, a vacuum planter. I like the planter. But when we were having trouble getting the planter to work, it's nice with cell phones, you can call up the engineer and take a picture of what you're doing and email it to him or text it to them, and they can see it right while you're working in the field. And you can hear them laughing on the telephone when they say, "Oh my goodness, you're crazy. You're trying to plant into that? You can't even walk in it. How are you going to plant in it?" So we got to figure out a way to do it, and we did. We figured out a way to do it. So if you give up, then you give up. But we don't have to, and we have to work on that. We have to research more of the timing of operations. Why did that one thing work and then a week later it didn't? Those are critical issues that farmers want to understand so that we can get a better idea. We don't want every farmer to have to experiment on their own. So how are we going to create research projects and research teams that are looking at these sorts of things? We need to look at the relationships between the cover crops and the weather. How do weather patterns affect cover crops? For example, in California, if you don't water it, it doesn't grow. So you buy your water because it never rains. So you buy water. Well, we had to change the watering system because we had to buy some water to get the cover crop started. But once the cover crop was growing, we used less water to grow the cash crop. So in the end, we used roughly the same amount of water, but it was apportioned differently. So in the past, Tom said, I always saved my water ration for later in the year because I know I needed it, but now I need some up front because the impact by weather is completely different. And then how do we begin to think about cover crop mixes in these systems so that we have more biodiversity? The challenge, of course, if you're going to roll it, it has to be in full flower. If you roll it before it flowers, it will stand back up because it hasn't completed its life cycle. The urge to reproduce from a plant, just like anything else that's living on Earth, is tremendous. And it will do whatever it has to try to reproduce, and it will try to flower. So, for example, rolling hairy vetch has to be in full bloom. We roll it all the time, and we kill it. Penn State University called me one day, and they said, "We can't kill hairy vetch with your roller." I said, "Yes, you can." "No, you can't." I said, "Yes, you can." They said, "We can't." I said, "Because you rolled it too early." They said, "No, we didn't." I said, "Yes, you did." I said, "What would happen if you did nothing to it? Just let it alone?" They said, "It would die." And then I didn't say anything. And then they said, "Okay, we rolled it too early, goodbye." And they hung up the phone. Timing is very important, but we have to understand that timing. We have to understand how that timing works in cover crop mixes, because if one crop is flowering and the other isn't, or you have 10 things and they all flower at different times, how do you know when you're going to be able to roll that? I understand the biodiversity is exciting for the soil, but we have to manage that within the context of what we're trying to do as farmers. So it's a balance between what's practical and what's theoretically wonderful. What we try to do is get cover crop mixes over time. So I have some single species mixes, but I'm always planting cover crops and always different cover crops. So the soil gets a very diversified diet over time, not just all at the same time. And I think that works. So again, a lot of things to talk about and questions that we have. I did write a book about this subject, so that's out there, and you can buy it online on Amazon, or you can get it from Rodale Institute. You can probably buy it used from somebody who didn't like it. I don't know. It's out there. But I don't make any money on the book. That's not why I wrote it. It's a way to get all the information in one place, so you're welcome to go look at that. And now I think we have time for, try to save about half an hour for questions and answers. So I'm hoping that we can have a conversation here, and maybe someone in the room has tried some of these systems or has a comment on soil health or any things we talked about today that we can have a conversation. It doesn't have to just be me answering the question. Maybe a better answer is in the room. So I appreciate your time. I know you're all very busy people, and to come and listen to me was a real honor for me, so thank you very much.